Cannibal Corpse play brutal death metal. It's violent, it's grotesque, it's been banned, and it's made them one of the best-selling bands in all of extreme metal history. Since 1990's Eaten Back to Life, Cannibal Corpse has churned out one punishingly heavy album after another. Both of their vocalists, original singer Chris Barnes and current frontman Corpse Grinder, are icons to millions. This week, the band releases its 14th studio album, Red Before Black. And for us, that's an excuse to look back. Today on Lock Horns, it's our Essential Albums debate on Cannibal Corpse.
Welcome back to Lock Horns, BangerTV's metal debate show. A reminder, if you're watching in the archive, we do go live. Well, this week, we're celebrating all things Cannibal Corpse with the release of their brand new record, Red Before Black. Gives us a reason to dig back into the top 5 essential albums of Cannibal Corpse's very long 14-album deep career. And to help me wade through all of the opinions on Lock Horns today is RINO MATARAZZO. How are you?
I'm great, how are you?
Thanks for joining us on the show. RINO is bassist for local Toronto death metal band Six of Swords. They're pretty fucking killer. Check them out. Now, usually I badger all of you to subscribe to the channel. Well, this week, I'm not gonna do that. And why? Well, we finally reached the 100,000 subscriber mark. Let's hear it. RINO, will you do us the honors? Let's blow that puppy.
Up to.
Woo! Nothing says production value like confetti flying through the air. Thank you for that. So RINO, let's get into this. Give me a little sense of how you got into death metal.
Okay, age of 12 or 13, I was getting really into stuff like nu metal, Slipknot, Limp Bizkit, Korn. Wanted something heavier. Got into the show Much Loud. They played, you know, Slayer, Morbid Angel, Obituary, Crowbar. And then the rest is history. Once I got into high school, I was just a sponge for metal and death metal specifically.
Right. Now, it's one thing to get into death metal, perhaps, but it's another thing to become a connoisseur of Cannibal Corpse. Give me a little sense of how you got into Cannibal Corpse and what you like about their music.
In grade 9, a friend of mine who was actually a year older than me handed me a copy of The Bleeding. And I had no idea who they were, and I was just put it in my CD player, and I was blown away at how much more aggressive they were than anything else that I ever heard, and I just needed more.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, well, we got to do some usual housekeeping now. You know the drill here. Our job today is we're going to try and take these 14 albums and reduce it to the 5 essential, most important albums of Cannibal Corpse's career. And as some of you will remember on a previous episode of Lock Horns, where we discussed the essential albums of death metal, because we couldn't reach a consensus on a Cannibal Corpse album, they were left off the island. We got a little flack for that, maybe some justified, but hey, it's time to make decisions, and we got to do it today. So what we want to hear is not only what your favorite Cannibal Corpse record is, but of course we want to hear why. We want to hear your arguments. And before we get into it, I want to give a shout out to everyone that's joining us today for Lock Horns from around the world. We've got friends in the US of A from Nashville, Columbus, the Bronx, Milwaukee, Bullhead City, no idea where that is, Denver, and then internationally we've got Honduras, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Indonesia, Germany, Switzerland, Wales, Belgium, Poland, Malaysia, Bristol, Slovakia, and then locally we've got Toronto, and as always, the Schwa. There's always people down the road in Oshawa joining us for the show. Joining me in the newly named Banger Hangar, of course, is Lisa Ladiseur. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Sam.
How are you?
I'm ready to celebrate our 100,000 subscribers with this awesome show.
Good job. For those of you who don't know, Lisa's also really the mastermind behind all things BangerTV, and you've got a new and improved set behind you today.
Yeah, I've decided I'm going to change the backdrop every week, and everyone can try and figure out what these albums have in common, but it's really just their album cover color.
Yeah.
So one thing not to argue about on the show.
A lot of red and black in metal, as we love it. So, okay, let's get into Cannibal Corpse.
Okay.
Give us, Reno, a little bit of a mini history on Cannibal Corpse, if you could.
All right, started in 1988 in Buffalo, New York.
Yeah.
They released a demo and started touring, playing shows, got signed to Metal Blade, released Eaten Back to Life, continued on to The Bleeding, and then their singer, Chris Barnes, left the group, and they got a new singer, George Fisher Corpse Grinder, and continued to release album after album, getting heavier and heavier from then on.
And really, it's been a fairly consistent lineup, of course, with Alex on bass and Paul on drums, and the guitar job has shifted a little bit, sort of, but there has been consistency too.
Yeah, in and out. So they had Bob Rousset up until Tomb of the Mutilated.
Yeah.
He left. They got Rob Barrett.
Yeah.
And then after that, they had Pat O'Brien come in here and moved on till Jack Owen left the band, and Rob Barrett actually came back for Kill.
Right. And in brief, how do you think the sound of Cannibal Corpse has evolved, or perhaps not evolved, over these 14 albums?
Slight changes here and there.
Yeah.
Pretty thrashy on Eaten Back to Life. Then they got into more of their sound, Butchered at Birth, Tomb of the Mutilated, a little heavier, more of that death metal sound you like, blast beats, heavier palm muted guitars.
Yep.
Once they got to Vile, got a little bit more technical, new vocalist. Then later on, around Torture, they're starting to get a little bit back to their old stuff.
Okay.
A little heavier, groove-oriented.
Yeah. A couple things we mentioned before we went live that I think is important to mention about this band, sort of in broad strokes. One, this is a band that's been on a single label for their entire career. As the story goes, Brian Slagle at Metal Blade picked them up right on the heels, I think, of their first demo, and they've been with them ever since. And I challenge our viewers to think of another band within metal that's been with a single label for that long. I think the other thing that's quite remarkable about Cannibal Corpse, not only, I guess, the stability of some of the members, but the fact that this is an album that creates truly extreme, grotesque, and really challenges, I think, what the average person would consider to be even music. And yet they've sold millions of albums. They continue to play to big crowds around the world. It's pretty remarkable, don't you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a pretty incredible story. But enough about that. Let's get into the business. We like to kick things off with selecting the legend. Take a look at this clip. That, of course, is Staring Through the Eyes of the Dead off The Bleeding, which is the band's fourth album. I'm for now going to set it up here so we can get a good look. Obviously, there's going to be some debate here, Reno, but why, in your opinion, should The Bleeding be considered the legend record for Cannibal Corpse?
So a lot of people are going to argue between that or Tomb of the Mutilated. I agree with The Bleeding being picked because so Rob Barrett joined the band. His rhythm guitar tone and rhythm playing is a lot heavier than what they were before. And when he left the band, they were kind of lacking in that department. They kind of overcompensated with a lot of technical stuff.
Okay.
Whereas on The Bleeding, very, very heavy, a lot of grooves. It was death metal, but a little bit more palatable than some of the other death metal around at the time.
Gotcha. And I mean, is it a factor that this was Chris Barnes' final record with the band in that sense? I mean, was there something vocally happening on the record, or do you think that that's pure coincidence?
I think it's a coincidence. Like vocally, he was about the same through the last three that he did with them.
Yeah. Cool. Fair enough. Let's go to the board. I think, Lisa, we have some agreement.
Of course, we have lots of comments about The Bleeding.
All right, here we go. Let's get to the board. The Bleeding. Domingo Marino says The Bleeding is easily their best, showing brutality, variation, and a general willingness to experiment. Waniel Young, The Bleeding, it's the pinnacle of Barnes era Cannibal. It's where the Barnes era sound came together. It's basically a death metal pop album. Every song is a banger. Every song is a hit. The only problem with that album is that the artwork sucks dingly, dangly, donkey dick. And we carry on. Spencer Gerber says, definitely their most essential album. Staring Through the Eyes of the Dead is probably the only death metal song that has ever made me feel legitimately disturbed and uneasy, which of course is a mark of quality. Chemo Embryo says The Bleeding is their master of puppets. Superjoint adds, it's not the best, but it was very easy to get into for someone new to death metal as I was back then. If the goal was to expand the audience, it did the job right. Elijah Andrews says The Bleeding is literally the worst Barnes album. Even Cannibal knew it. They were gonna kick his ass out. And lastly, we've got Alexander Vandekavai. The Bleeding must be my least favorite album. It's very 6 Feet Under-like. A lot of groove, squealy vocals, a lot of bass guitar. This style got perfected with 6 Feet Under, not in this album. Of course, 6 Feet Under being the band that Chris Barnes went on to form after he got ousted from Cannibal. I guess you don't agree with the people who are dissenting there.
No.
Yeah. It's a pretty solid album, and I think generally people would agree that this is the legend. Lisa?
Well, y'all can debate that in the chat, but what this means is that The Bleeding is making it onto the top 5 no matter what else happens.
Right.
That's what the legend is here on Lockhorns. So there's 4 spots left. I'm not good at math. And we'll be able to debate the rest of the albums for those 4 spots now.
Okay, only 4 spots to go, but before we return to the board, we always give our guest their choice, the album that you, Reno, think that deserve to be in the top 5 essential albums.
Okay, my pick is Kill.
Okay.
Rob Barrett recently joined the band again.
Right.
And they started to record with Eric Rutan, which I believe really helped their sound. They got a lot tighter on record.
Yeah. Generally a well-produced record. I mean, I guess Rutan, of course, has got a big reputation in the death metal community for great sounding records.
Yeah, so when they left more sound around here, they started moving to El Paso, Texas.
Right.
The album quality was a little bit less than what it used to be.
Right.
And then once you get into the Eric Rutan stuff, you can really notice the difference on the production value there.
It's a good point. We often forget how much the producers have a role in really shaping the sound of the record, and maybe there's no coincidence that I think for a lot of fans, this sort of, early era Corpse Grinder area of the band's career might be the sort of least favorite among fans, which may have something to do with the production as well. Yeah. Okay, Kill. What are people saying about Kill, Lisa?
First, we're going to go to a clip while I get those comments together.
Okay, here we go.
For those of you who don't remember this album, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really hearing that sort of meteor extreme metal production that I think our ears have now got used to.
Yeah.
A lot bigger sounding record than certainly those early ones.
Yeah, Alex's bass is starting to come through a little bit better.
That's a good point. Yeah, for sure. I mean, Alex, a bass player in extreme metal, there's not often a lot of room to move. We know we're both bass players, but Alex, of course, to be credited not only for being a key songwriter in this band, but really having his own voice in the band. Okay, Lisa, let's go to the board and see how many friends or enemies Reno has. Here we go. Mick Luton. Kill is friggin' awesome. Great choice. El Raza. Great riffage on Kill. Christopher Vega. Kill is their masterpiece. Nick Ottaviano. After a series of not-so-great albums, Cannibal Corpse came back with Rob Barrett back on guitar for this modern death metal masterpiece. A lot of Rob Barrett fans, you're included.
Absolutely.
Tim Gavin. Kill is for sure an essential album, has that classic Cannibal Corpse sound, but the production is polished in a way that feels both accessible to new listeners, yet doesn't feel overproduced. Elijah Andrews is back. Kill had horrific production. Wait a second, stop the record. Corpse Grinder was so overwhelmingly loud on the album, and it makes it almost unlistenable. The riffs are great, just can't hear them. Any thoughts on that?
I have to disagree.
Yeah?
I think the production is incredible. Listen to it compared to like Gore Obsessed, and tell me that Gore Obsessed sounds better than Kill.
Right. Fair enough. You gotta love your Corpse Grinder, I guess, to love Kill. Fair enough. Okay, we're gonna move on. We got a lot to cover here. So far, we've got 2 albums, The Bleeding and Kill. 2 of the 5 spots are currently occupied. But now what we're gonna do is spend a little time focusing on the early era, the Chris Barnes era, which, you know, is actually only 4 records when you look at it in the scope of things versus 10 now with George. But it tends to get the lion's share of attention. Has a lot to do with the fact, I think, that was the time when death metal was really having its first big impact. So what are the thoughts then on these records? Lisa, do we want to go to the board first to see what people have to say about the Chris Barnes stuff?
Sure. I
Okay.
mean, no surprise, people do want to talk about Tomb of the Mutilated.
No surprise. Here we go, Ramp Face 85. What else needs to be said besides it's their masterpiece, Tomb of the Mutilated? It's up there with Master of Puppets, Raining Blood, and Paranoid as one of the best metal albums of all time. That's showing some serious love, putting them in some big company there. Mindless Studios says Tomb of the Mutilated, hands fucking down. Most influential and popular album. The first track is Hammer Smashed Face, for fuck's sake. Literally, it says, for fuck's sake. Alejo Clune says Tomb of the Mutilated defined brutal death metal, leaving behind the thrash metal and old school death metal leanings, their #1 album. Reno, what do you think about Tomb of the Mutilated?
I think it's a great album. Like I said, I had a hard time picking between The Bleeding and Tomb of the Mutilated.
Right.
They pretty much play Hammer Smash Face on every show they've ever played.
Right.
Unless they're in Germany where they can't.
Right.
But this album, much like The Bleeding, very heavy, very groove-oriented,
Right.
very heavy album.
Right. It's like Ride the Lightning to Master of Puppets. Almost everyone loves to argue about those. Okay, but let's keep moving. Does that mean that we move Tomb into the top 5, or are we just going to kind of test the waters here?
how things play out. But this guy's a regular, so I think we should answer his question.
Okay, Korgel the Exterminated. I have no idea why Hammer Smash Face is considered a great death metal song. Can you respond to that, Reno?
Well, I mean, one, as a bass player, there's a bass solo right near the beginning.
Say no more. End of story.
It comes at you like a punch in the face. Just like,
Yeah. And at that time, I mean, you always need a bit of a historical perspective here. Like, I think going back, we hear these records of production value, not what it is now, but at the time, that Morrisound sound was so heavy, and we have to remember that whatever this is, 94, nothing was really sort of, there weren't as many bands doing that truly low-end, pummeling death metal sound. But anyway, let's keep moving. Lisa, what are we going to talk about next?
Well, we have 2 records left from this era, and the one that no one seems to like very much is the first one.
Eaten Back to Life.
Yeah.
We do have one comment here. Horror Master, I can recall when I first saw the album cover of Eaten Back to Life and thinking, what the fuck is that? But compared to Tomb of the Mutilated is much heavier. I mean, I had to have a song title, Icon Blood Takes Balls, Ramp Face 85, Eaten Back to Life is all over the place, okay? Butchered at Birth is attempting to condense and simplify while still being technical with the performance. It's a good observation. EP 76 says that Eaten was great when it came out, but nowadays you can hear it as aged. I guess not aged well. Eaten Back to Life is basically a demo. That's not a bad point. Often a first album is basically the demo, just with maybe a bit better production and an album cover. Francis Lefebvre says their sound wasn't found yet on Eden. Yeah, your thoughts on Eden?
They were still a little thrashy. Like you can hear they're influenced by like Possessed and Creator. They hadn't really quite figured out what they were doing yet until they got to Butchered at Birth.
Right. Okay. So I think we can safely say that Eaten Back to Life is not going to be on the top 5. We figured that much out. But Lisa, I guess Butchered at Birth. There's a lot of comments.
So many. I'm working on it. Here, let's try.
Let's go. Camo, Embryo. I love the fact that Butchered just sounds so fucking disgusting. LOL. I feel with today's technology and production, younger fans can't appreciate the older death metal because it wasn't produced. Rampface 85. The production does ruin Butchered at Birth, but there's still some classic Cannibal Corpse songs on that album, and it's essential to the growth. Alexander Vandecave says, my favorite album is Tomb of the Mutilated. That's the album where they perfected their sound. Hammer Smash Face is just a classic of the death metal genre. We know that. Butchered at Birth belong in the top 5 in your opinion?
I'm like maybe about that. Like production isn't the greatest. They don't have a whole lot of really memorable songs on that album.
Right.
Versus, you know, the rest of their discography.
Okay, well, I'm just gonna poke the beast a bit here because it's what I love to do, and I'm gonna put Butchered at Birth in the top 5 and just see what happens on the internets. Anyway, Lisa.
So we need to move ahead to the majority of the albums that this band has put out in their career, and also let me get caught up on the chat, which is going great. Thanks everyone for all of your comments. There's actually so many, it's hard to keep up today. I'm trying my best. I'll let you guys talk about the shift to the next phase of Cannibal Corpse.
Yeah, I mean, as we said at the outset, I mean, basically we have one singer, Chris Barnes, in the band for roughly 8 years, and then we have Corpse Grinder in the band now for almost 20. So talk about that shift. Take us back to that time. Like, what do you think that shift did for the band?
I mean, you know, as a songwriter and lyricist, they kicked him out of the band. They had to kind of start from scratch. So the rest of the band started writing lyrics.
Yeah.
Then they had to find a vocalist. They actually recorded Vile with Chris Barnes and had to scrap all the vocals once they found, Corpse Grinder.
Yeah, yeah. And what do you think Corpse Grinder brought to the band that wasn't there with Barnes?
The thing I like about Corpse Grinder's vocals is they're just as low and brutal and heavy as Chris Barnes, but you can actually somewhat understand what he's saying.
Right.
If you're following along to the lyric sheet, you can follow along to what he's screaming.
Right. And before we went live, we were talking about a piece from the DVD where they talk about the opening scream on Vile. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so they had to introduce this new singer, something to prove.
Right.
And there's a part in Centuries of Torment where Corpse Grinder's talking about he did a bunch of takes, weren't going so well, so he went to the bathroom and he looked himself in the mirror and he had to hype himself up.
Right.
And then the take that's on the album was the first one he did right after he psyched himself up.
Right.
And listen to the album and it introduces himself very well.
It's like the Tom Araya Angel of Death moment.
Exactly.
Sort of announcing his arrival to the metal fold. Of course, he had been in Monstrosity prior to Cannibal Corpse, so he wasn't new to sort of hardcore metal fans, but obviously new to Cannibal Corpse. Lisa, do you want to go to the board on Vile, or are we going to a clip?
Let's go to a clip.
Okay, here we go. Let's hear a piece from Vile. Pretty fucking heavy, and look at that neck. It's the biggest neck ever in the history of necks. Certainly in metal, pretty impressive. Let's go to the board on Vile. Yar, da boom. Black metal mofo? Who knows? You motherfuckers need to talk about Vile. It is a death metal mission statement. It's a super technical album, and it proved that they were more than any one member. Great songs and brutal, with 2 O's, vocals. Thrash Maniac 99. A close second would be Vile. The band had a lot to prove with Corpse Grinder on vocals. Luckily, they exceeded the expectations and crafted a diabolical broth of blood and guts mixed with vomit. He's now writing lyrics for Cannibal Corpse. Money, B94. Vile, better be on the top 5. Rampface, 85. There's a lot of these guys just can't get it up. It's a small room out there in Cannibal Corpse Land. Corpse Grinder came out fucking swinging on Vile. Is this album the most underrated in their discography? Listening to Vile now, I forgot how fucking awesome Perverse Suffering is. I miss Jack Owen. Vile in third, because it's the crossover point in their history. I would say it's as important as The Bleeding, and I could go either way with ranking it in second or third. Headbangers and Hooligans, maybe the quote of the week, says, Vile is a nice kick to the nutsack. And cue the crickets. Let's put Vile in the top 5 and see what happens. Do you think it belongs in the top 5?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
First album with Corpse Grinder, and
Yep.
it's a great record front to back.
Cool. All right. Let's see what happens. I think again, being a little bit provocative with putting Butchered at Birth there, just to see if I could kick the hornet's nest. But Lisa, are we going to move on to some other albums from the Corpse Grinder era? Yes?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is a surprise to you, Reno. It was to me a little bit, but in the terms of the later records, the one that comes up the most is Torture.
Yeah, that's kind of shocking to me. I mean, I don't really see much of anything after Kill as being essential, but there was quite a shift at Torture. They were getting a little heavier, you know, back to some groove stuff like the early days.
Right.
So I could talk about that.
Okay, let's see Torture. Let's see what people have to say. Garrick Ship. Torture is one of Cannibal's best albums. It has one of the most well-rounded production jobs and showcases the expanding virtuosity of Alex Webster and Pat O'Brien, especially in songs like Followed Home Then Killed. Nothing like a literal song title, like that's what happened. And The Strangulation Chair. Great variety of tempos and grooves on this album. Very overlooked. Sid McCann says, Torture with Scourge of Iron. So killer, so chuggy, it's perfect. Jamie Price says, I love Torture. I'm not sure you do, but anyway, Scourge of Iron is the ultimate death metal track in my opinion. Lizzie Williams, a lot going on here for Torture. The band's sound has never changed drastically over time, and I find Torture to be just an incredibly strong demonstration of their abilities with nasty production by Eric Rutan to seal the deal. Any more there, Lisa?
One more.
Torture?
Here.
Troy Ritter says, people usually don't mention it, but Torture is probably my favorite, tied with The Bleeding. Every minute of Torture is memorable, and that really doesn't happen often with a lot of death metal. That's as straightforward as Cannibal Corpse. Some pretty well articulated support for Torture, I gotta say. So I'm gonna throw it up there and see what happens. Lisa, are we seeing any other contenders coming in?
Bloodthirst.
Bloodthirst.
Give me a second to get these together.
Yeah,
I'm
I know.
really trying to catch up. Reno, Bloodthirst.
Bloodthirst. Cue Reno.
I'm not a huge fan of Bloodthirst.
Okay.
Just like this kind of middle ground stuff. Mm-hmm. You know, good songs here and there,
Yep.
but as a whole album being essential, I feel like you could cut any of these albums out of the discography,
Right.
and you wouldn't really be missing much.
Right, and remind me, are we into?
Right here.
Oh, we're not. So we're not into Eric Rutan territory yet.
No.
So again, it's in the sort of early Corpse Grinder era, which I think, as we said earlier on, tends to get forgotten in the catalog. But let's see. I think Lisa's managed to catch up with the rampant commentary on Cannibal Corpse. Rampface really cares about Cannibal Corpse, and he or she says Bloodthirst should be on the list. Some of their catchiest and best live tracks on this album, unleashing the fucking bloodthirsty. Bloodthirst is also different because the cover has more of a sci-fi vibe. Yeah. I guess, sure, we'll buy that. I guess as sci-fi as Cannibal Corpse gets. Alexander Van de Cavey. I'm never going to get that right. Best album with the recent lineup is Bloodthirst. There's no other album that sounds so big and epic as this one. There's also more experimentation going on, which is very interesting to hear. Superjoint, yeah, that gets my vote. Sorry, lost you there, Lisa. There we go, Superjoint. Yeah, that gets my vote for Pound It Into Dust Alone. It's one of my favorite Cannibal Corpse tracks. Chemo, Embryo, Bloodthirst is beautifully produced. It sounds so fucking sick. Okay, so we got some love for Bloodthirst. We can't have 6 though. So what do? Do we get rid of Butchered at Birth?
Oh, yeah, we could do that.
But I think the horde, the Chris Barnes hordes are going to come screaming now that we only have one album from the Chris Barnes era represented in the top 5. And that, of course, being The Bleeding. Let's just do some housekeeping just to clarify what we've done in terms of our list. So here we are. We got The Bleeding, we got Kill, Bloodthirst, Vile, and Torture. There's a sentence you don't say every day, huh? But that's why we love this show. So those are our 5. Let me throw it out to the chat, though. Are you comfortable with none of the other Chris Barnes era Cannibal Corpse records being represented in the top 5 of all time? Lisa, how are you doing? Catch a breath there.
A little bit. A few straggly comments
Okay.
on some of the records we haven't yet talked about. We'll give them a moment to maybe spark some discussion.
Okay, we got Aiden Rudder. The Wretched Spawn is absolutely worth discussing. There's 10 that are catchy, memorable, and technical as hell, with one of their finest covers. Rotten Body Landslide is untouchable greatness. Jeremy Dibble, A Skeletal Domain should be mentioned on the list. The album shows that the band can still experiment and still make brutal songs after being around for a long time. Thoughts on those two?
I mean, Wretched Spawn, another great album.
Yeah.
But again, we're into that middle ground, like early Corpse Grinder stuff,
Yep.
where the production wasn't really great. They're, in El Paso, Texas.
Right.
I don't really think they picked it up with Corpse Grinder until they got with Eric Rutan.
Right, I see. Okay. We were talking about earlier, I remember we featured the Wretched Spawn in Headbanger's Journey, our first documentary, when I handed someone the cover. And, it might take the cake for being the most wretched of all covers in the catalog, which of course could be, we could do a Lockhorns just on what's the best cover of Cannibal Corpse.
Yeah, we could.
Maybe next time.
Maybe next time. But we'll never get out of here alive if we don't address the fact that Tomb of the Mutilated is not in the top 5.
Right.
And it means that something's got to go for it
It
to
does
get in
mean
there.
that something's got to go, but I mean, let me ask, have we heard enough support for Tomb of the Mutilated
Yeah.
to warrant it?
Yeah, there's a lot of shouting.
There's a lot of shouting. Okay, so we want to hear what needs to go. If Tomb of the Mutilated is going to get into the top 5, we need to get some consensus on which one of these 5 need to go. Thrash Maniac 99. General observation: Chris Barnes today equals shitty Cookie Monster. Chris Barnes then equal demonic caveman. And of course, calling someone a demonic caveman in the context of metal is the greatest compliment you could possibly get. Aggressive tendencies. Fuck Bloodthirst. Get Tomb in there. Okay, here we go. Francis Lefebvre, remove Bloodthirst and add Butchered. Okay. Replace Ninja Zulu 3141. Ninja Zula says, replace Torture with Tomb. Tomb is the epitome of Cannibal Corpse and death metal as a whole. Whoa! We need another twist popper for Ninja Zula. Okay, Bloodthirst.
Yeah, I could see that go.
Seems as though perhaps Bloodthirst is the one that needs to go. Although there also seems to be some support for removing Torture. And it seems as though Tomb of the Mutilated is nudging just above Butchered of Birth to belong in the almighty canon of Cannibal Corpse.
Yeah, at this point, it's coming in so fast. I'm just going to make this live chat
Live.
easier for you guys to sort of scroll through.
Okay, well let's just switch over to this live chat and see what's coming down. We
In real time.
In real time. This is real time. So we've got our 5. Bloodthirst was ruled off the island. Tomb of the Mutilated was put on there. The Chris Barnes supporters spoke up, but it's a bit of a mix here. I guess we could put these chronological order because, after all, we're metalheads and we love.
Other way.
Yes, thank you very much. Good thing you're here, Reno. Of course, Tomb before Bleeding,
Vile.
Vile before Kill, and then Torture would be the latest
Yes.
album in the catalog. Torture being what year? Do you have that on your top of your head? Are we into the 2000s now?
Yes.
Yes, we must be.
Oh, yeah.
2012?
Anyway, 2012.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lisa. What an expert, even though she is wearing a Killing Joke shirt. But we won't talk about that. Okay, live chat. Holy shit. Okay, Tomb. Wretched Spawn is fucking immense album, growing heavier and groovy. Okay, we got Wretched Spawn. Throw out Torture, motherfucker. Get rid of, not gonna read that. Ace Ventura, we haven't talked about that. Of course, famously featuring Hammersmith's Face,
Absolutely.
right? Back in, what was that, 94, I think the movie came out, something like that. Evisceration, Ditch Kill, Bloodthirst, Tomb. It's just turning into like a haiku poem here.
All right,
Cannibal.
let's just make this super simple, guys. We're not adding any other albums that is not Tomb of the Mutilated at this point. We just need to make space for it.
Yeah.
So all your other arguments will fall on deaf ears
Tomb is
and
in.
can live on in the archive.
Tomb is in. Let me say it one more time. Tomb is in. If there's another album that you want added, that's where we need to go. But maybe we should step away from it for a moment to talk about album art. To let
things cool off.
Let the knuckle draggers bash it out. Let's talk about this album art. I mean, again, it's a whole other episode. What can you say in general about Cannibal Corpse album art?
They've been using the same artist, Vincent Locke, the entire discography.
Right.
Butchered at Birth was the first album they had to have censored. They had to have a censored cover for it.
Right.
And got banned in Germany and I believe Russia because of it. They couldn't sell it there or in New Zealand.
Yep. I think you're right. I think it's the first. I remember from Headbanger's Journey interviewing Brian Slagle. I think he said the first 3 or 4 are banned in Germany. I think they may have been banned in Australia and New Zealand for some of the records as well. But I mean, I guess to state the obvious, what is Cannibal Corpse artwork about?
Well, basically they give Vincent their song titles and he bases the artwork off the song titles. So, you know, if you look at the song titles and look at the album artwork, you're going to see, you know, a good chunk of what they're about in the artwork.
Right. I mean, another point, you know, we pointed out at the outset, same metal label since the very beginning, same artist since the very beginning. And at the risk of getting too academic here, I mean, there's one thing I think that metalheads honor, it's consistency. And there's a certain amount of like honoring the ability to stick to something that you believe in. And so really Cannibal Corpse in some way is a model extreme metal band for not only being with the same label. Of course, Brian Slagle, highly respected figure, just had his book come out, but then also, you know, not even Maiden stuck with their artist for their entire discography, who created Eddie, probably the most iconic image in the history of heavy metal. But anyway, that's a really interesting point. And yeah, definitely the most disgusting album covers that have probably ever been allowed in record stores in the history of all music. Okay, Lisa, back to the board. Anything else?
Yeah.
Or are we wrapping this baby up?
I think the last thing for you guys to maybe consider is removing Torture and putting Butchered at Birth back on. There's some consensus about that.
Okay, let's see. Renato V or 5 says that Torture is not important for the history of death metal. Well, we're not doing that. We're doing the history of Cannibal Corpse, just pointing that out. Mindless Studios, Torture is a good album, but that album hasn't been around long enough for me to consider it an essential album. Well, that's interesting. I mean, Red Before Black, who knows? Maybe come Friday, people want that on the list. We'll see. That Metal Awesomeness says that Butchered at Birth was at the beginning of brutal death metal, and even if it's not their best Barnes album, I would say it's still important to spreading death metal. Torture was a filler. Ouch! I don't know about filler, but do we put 3 Barnes albums in the top 5? Is that fair?
There were a lot of good comments about Torture.
I would say, I'd say some of the best articulated comments about Torture, some of the best articulated comments of the show were about Torture. Yeah, what do you think?
If you actually go to Exclaim, my friend Denise wrote her top 5 of Cannibal Corpse.
Okay.
And Torture is also in her list, which made me start thinking about it.
Interesting.
And they did really, you know, it was kind of like a new beginning for the new direction of, you know, incorporating some of their older sound.
Right.
A lot more, you know, riff-based stuff, a little more like palatability than their like more technical stuff that they started to get into.
Right, and we talked about earlier maybe with the marriage of Corpse Grinder and Eric Rutan sort of being on board together, that they found a new beginning, if you will, with that album. Fair enough. I would say that Torture stays, and I don't know. I would say putting 3 of the 4 Chris Barnes albums in the top 5, I think that might be fighting a losing battle. But Lisa, what do I know? What the board's saying? Anything else?
Well, people who like Chris are like, who cares?
Right. Chris is Chris.
Right.
Torture is very good, on par with Wretched Spawn, much better than Kill. Butcher of Birth did an amazing impact in the world because nobody... I think it's hard to argue to have Butchered at Birth in there when you already have Tomb of the Mutilated and The Bleeding. Let's not forget that those first 4 records were released in 4 years. So, you know, one could argue that there's not a lot of difference between them sonically.
They're very similar. They're all recorded at More Sound. Because they were so recorded close together, their sound didn't change.
Yeah.
They sounded very the same.
Yeah. Just to state the obvious, I think it's probably a reflection of which Cannibal Corpse album was your gateway, right? If it was Butchered at Birth, then you're never going to forget that album.
Of course. And like with me, The Bleeding, like I can never take that out of the top.
Yeah, there you go. It's probably becomes very personal, this metal stuff, doesn't it? Lisa, I think I'm feeling good with this.
Good.
You feeling good with this, Reno?
I'm feeling great.
You gonna be able to sleep tonight?
I think so.
You gonna go back and listen to Torture maybe once or twice?
Absolutely.
I think I'm gonna do the same, and with Kill as well. So there you go. We actually did it without any of our own bloodshed on the Banger Hanger set. Let's go through it. The top 5 Cannibal Corpse album as voted by viewers of Banger TV: Tomb of the Mutilated, The Bleeding, Vile, Kill, and Torture. Such poetic elegance here on Banger TV. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Reno.
Thank you for having me.
Wouldn't have been able to do it without you. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Andrew. And most importantly, thank you, Cedric, for joining us in the studio today. Important, next Lock Horns, next week, November 9th, 4 p.m. Eastern. We're finally tackling Death Tech, and joining me from Exclaim, who's been here before, is Callum Slingerland. And a reminder to subscribe. Why? Well, because we want to get to 1 million, don't we, Lisa?
We do.
Take us to 1 million. Thank you for watching Lock Horns on Banger TV. We'll see you next time.